Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a special edition webinar that we're putting on here today. I'll let the presenters introduce themselves. Just a couple of reminders. Only the presenters' mics will be unmuted. If you have a question or something you want to add to the conversation, you're welcome to do so in the chat. If you experience any audio issues, any technical problems, please feel free to send me a message there as well, and I'll try my best to help. My name is Dr. Eric Perry. I am the social media coordinator for ACES and a clinical faculty member at Southern New Hampshire University. And I'm going to be helping out kind of in the background here today. Again, this presentation is audio only. So if you have any trouble, please let me know and we'll go ahead and get started.
Well, hello all. My name's Chris Goodrich and I'm the current president of ACES this year. I'm very excited to bring you a webinar, Innovative Strategies for Clinical Practice in Challenging Times. This webinar will be co-moderated with the elective ACES, Heather Ambrose from Walden University, and we are both incredibly excited to have four incredibly distinguished counselor educators joining us to share different innovative strategies that they've used at their university to move through some of the times we're facing currently with COVID-19. Those colleagues, Dr. Casey Barrio, University of Tennessee at Knoxville, who is also our upcoming ACES president-elect, Natoya Hoskins from the College of William & Mary, Aaron Mason from Georgia State University, as well as Sandra Logan from Florida International University. This webinar is born from several conversations that we had in ACES related to the COVID-19 crisis, to ensure that provide some support for our members, to educators to serve our community and our profession as best we can in time with little direction and lots of confusion. I hope you're all well and safe at home, and that all the materials shared today could be useful practice. At this time, I'd like to just turn this over to Heather Ambrose if she would like to introduce herself to the group and then move through our presenters.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Ambrose, and I am the president-elect of ACES, and I am currently a core faculty member with Walden University, and I am very excited to be participating in this webinar with all of you today. Let's turn to our presenters now, and let's start with Casey Barrio-Minton.
Hello, everybody. I'm Casey Barrio-Minton. I am a professor of counselor education at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I'm currently serving as our clinical mental health counseling program coordinator and also coordinating accreditation activities for our units.
Next, I'd like to invite Natoya Hoskins.
Yes, hi everyone. Happy to be here today. And I am currently on faculty at William & Mary. I serve as the coordinator of the PhD program, and I teach approximately half of our school counseling clinical courses.
And Aaron Mason.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wishing you all the wellness that we need during these current times. I'm an assistant professor at Georgia State University, teaching primarily in our school counseling program, both master's and EDS, as well as our counselor ed and practice doctoral program, also a former school counselor myself.
And then finally, Sandy Logan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandy Logan McKibben, and I am a clinical assistant professor at Florida International University, where I serve as the program director for our master's degree in counselor education, as well as the school counseling track coordinator and CACREF liaison.
And thank you all for introducing yourself to the larger group. As part of this webinar, we thought we'd take the idea of take a penny, leave a penny. And so we'd begin with our distinguished colleagues to share some of the experiences that they've had, ways that they've navigated through this situation, and then move through different questions, concerns that you all have, as well as strategies that you might also share with a larger group, so we could be supportive as one larger counselor education family as we are. I do know some of our colleagues do have to plug out earlier in the webinar to support their universities in different ways. And so I'd like to start with Dr. Erin Mason from Georgia State University. I'm wondering, how have you navigated some of the struggle with clinical work, clinical placements since the COVID-19 crisis began?
Sure. So I would say that we're in pretty good standing at Georgia State because for our school counseling students, we tend to follow the school, the local school schedule fairly closely. And so that's been to our advantage, but I've been talking with a lot of colleagues who don't necessarily follow the school calendar sort of the same way that we do. And so I've really been thinking about them and potential options for them. A couple of the things that we have done that I think have been really helpful and that I would encourage, number one is collaboration. We've had certainly lots of conversations, not only among faculty who work with students around the clinical placements, and that goes for our rehab and our mental health programs as well. But I also think one of the things that we've really tried to actively do is have ongoing conversations with those who are in director roles, whether it's at schools or agencies, and to get on calls with each other so that the directors are aware of, multiple programs and how we're all trying to address the issues. And so we're hearing from each other. So that collaboration, I think, has been really important for us. I would also say on the school counseling front, we are, and I know that there are some states where they're really looking at schools not providing any kind of virtual services. So I've been kind of holding them in my mind. In our case, we're able to have our students work closely with their supervisors to provide some virtual services. We're not really allowing students to do so independently, but we are allowing them to provide virtual services in concert with their supervisors. One of the areas that I wanted to mention in terms of just trying to think more outside of the box and creatively is more along the lines of consultation and coordination types of activities, not so much the typical, more individual counseling and group counseling, because I think people are handling those pretty differently from program to program and state to state. So within the idea of consultation and coordination, we have focused a lot on helping our students think ahead to what happens in K-12 schools with articulation and transition. So that's the move from elementary to middle school, from middle school to high school. And these are all activities that are likely going to be, have been sort of traditional for schools in terms of how they approach these activities, where maybe they have fifth graders that, get on a bus and they go to the middle school and they see what middle school is like, or maybe they have high school students go to the middle school and answer questions, things like that. So we're having our students really think ahead about how they can help their supervisors with doing these same kinds of articulation and transition activities, but in a way that is obviously virtual. And so that can mean that maybe interns are calling the incoming families to welcome them to that new school community. It may be that they are working with students virtually to prepare videos or activities for those incoming students. So these are activities kind of under the umbrella of consultation and coordination that I think can be really powerful in terms of how they impact the full school community, but they don't necessarily venture into more of the mental health and social emotional kinds of topics. So we've been having our students really think about that. And I think also for the supervisors, they're so caught up in just the day-to-day of what they're doing that they may not be thinking ahead to that. And so our interns can potentially be supportive and trying to plan ahead those kinds of activities. In addition, we've also talked to our students about doing parent or staff presentations. I guess I should say family or staff presentations, not just recorded, but also potentially doing some sort of live stream version, whether that's through Facebook Live or maybe through YouTube, so that again, they can get some direct hours of delivering to, to stakeholders, but not necessarily just doing recorded things, doing things that are actually live streamed too. So, and then the final one that I thought I would mention, I've got a couple of documents that I can share in the chat, just my own initiatives and trying to collect some different ideas here. And one of them that I thought was good for us to think about, because we do have a number of students who are bilingual, is them offering their services, whether it is in their own school or perhaps in their feeder schools, to provide some translation for families that may need it during this time. So I just wanted to hit on those because I think those are ones that we've particularly talked about at GSU, but I am very conscious of the fact that the context of every program is different, and so we need to generate a lot of innovative strategies.
Thank you, Erin. We appreciate that. I would like to call on Natoya Hoskins next to have her share what they have been doing at her institution.
Thank you, Heather. So some of the things that Erin mentioned, we're also doing. So I'm going to try to focus on those that are different and unique to what's already been shared. So one of the things that we've done initially, and this is not necessarily a direct link to students getting direct services, but we have what we are calling a huddle every single morning, Monday through Friday, where it gives us an opportunity as faculty to talk about any challenges that we're seeing our students experience related to their clinical work, whether it be issues related to not getting hours or some of the sites making transitions and students having difficulty, making those transitions, either because they don't have, software or just concerns around whatever the platform that's being used with the site. We found that to be really helpful with just maintaining transparency in this difficult time. Many of us really, just never realizing or many of us never expecting to have this type of situation. And so having that grounding space allows us as a faculty to be able to process these issues a lot better and not in a vacuum, which has been really helpful. Some of the other things that we're doing is several faculty members, myself, another faculty member, direct programs that are not counseling per se programs, but they're programs that support students either at the undergrad level or in K through 12 settings. And so we have developed support groups and clinical opportunities for our school counseling students in particular to take advantage of to get those direct hours. And so those support groups include anything from helping students, learn how to apply for jobs, summer jobs, or, how do you take a GRE or an SAT. It also has the, Erin already mentioned this, but aspect of being able to provide support to parents as well. And so we are looking to get those off the ground starting next week. And so we've been kind of in a planning process. We've also gotten buy-in from some of our community stakeholders. I am meeting with the director of our of Williamsburg, James City County, which is where I currently live, and is where William and Mary is as well, of their school counseling program to really kind of provide her with some of the resources that we've identified, as well as find out from her ways that we can support students that will allow our students to get direct hours, but also support them in this difficult time. I've also had conversations with the family engagement person at the in the school system, and she has primarily been a part of the Grab and Go program that our city takes part in to help feed students during these types of situations. And so we are talking about ways that our students can also volunteer and kind of touch base with parents and families during those types of interactions. We also are working with our clinical mental health students to make sure that they are in placements that will allow them to feel safe. One of the concerns that we had early on was, some of our students were having to go to sites where they hadn't closed yet and they weren't feeling like they were getting a lot of support. And so we've really reached out to all of our sites. We have this constant communication where we're sending emails to our site supervisors, to our any other coordinators, clinical coordinators that we're working with, to really just keep them in the know around, how we want to support them, and to find out if they have any concerns related to our students getting their hours. And so that communication piece, I think, is really huge. And we've tried to be as intentional about that, just to make sure that we're not, that no one's falling through the cracks. This week, I specifically had site visits with all of my site supervisors, which is a lot, if you really think about it. But, and I say site, virtual meetings with all of my site supervisors. This is for all of the students that are in the internship, the school counseling internship, to really touch base with them to find out what can our students do to continue to make progress. And so what I've done is put together a plan for each of our students to ensure that their direct hours are met. They're aware of it, and this is, like I said, more transparency than what we've done in the past, because we just haven't had to be, like this. And so all of the students in the internship know exactly, what those hours need to look, what those hours are, but also what are the ways that they're going to meet those hours between now and graduation in May.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hoskins. As I listen to you and also Dr. Mason talk, I get very excited about some of the strategies that you shared. It also reminds me that anytime we talk about these different innovative strategies that we can use to support our programs, as Dr. Hoskin raised, it really does take a village, that it can't be the work of a single faculty member, but there needs to be a communication across one larger counselor education program, as well as stakeholders for this to really support our students and support our programs moving forward. And so we appreciate your intentional focus around that. I think that's incredibly important to highlight, especially when we speak today. Some of us are maybe feeling a great deal of anxiety as we move through this. Additionally, I just want to thank Mason for all the different strategies that she shared, reminding us of the role of consultants as a school counselor, and how they could serve different stakeholders and teachers who may become aware of mental health issues when they work virtually or remotely with their students, and be a point of support if receiving appropriate supervision. At this point in time, I'd like to move to our new panelists, and then we'll open it broadly across the panel and then to the larger group. And that would be Dr. Casey Barrio-Minton, University of Tennessee, Knoxville.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I am going to be careful to try to not repeat things that other panelists have already shared, but I do want to acknowledge that I hear a lot of common strands coming out already. As we started navigating this as a program, I think it was very important for us to set clear our priorities. And it's a triage of sorts. So our number one priority is spring 2020 graduates. How can we help our students who are on track to graduate in the next month essentially complete that and be out into the workforce? Our second priority was on summer 2020 graduates. And not that we didn't care about our practicum students, because we absolutely did, but we decided that decisions about how we handle practicum can come later in the summer when we better understand our situation. As we started out in this process, communication also became very important to us. And I think we've heard some nice examples about what that can look like with sites and with faculty. We also thought it was important to be in communication with our students, and we knew that we had people often getting changing information day to day and hour by hour. So one thing that we've implemented that was quite helpful that we're continuing to use was just a simple Google form asking our students who were in field experience to update us on the status of their sites. Were their sites still operating as usual? Were they operating in a modified capacity? Had they been asked not to return? And also, where were their direct and indirect hours currently at? We created that so that students could continually update it. And what we found is that we rolled it out, and even within the next day or two, we would have big clumps of new information coming in and changes in that. We were able to make that available to our faculty and also to our adjuncts so that we just had a good sense of where our students are and what they were needing. What we've realized in the last week is that all of our school counseling students are at our sites at this point. About half of our clinical mental health counseling students are out of their sites, and the other half have been reassigned to telehealth. And so that has helped us to start understanding what our response needs to look like. In terms of structural decisions, one of the things that was important to our faculty was to start becoming clear on what is a program requirement, what is a state licensure requirement, and what is a CACREP requirement. So in some cases, we have program policy and practices that exceeded CACREP requirements. And we just worked to be very clear in those initial moments that although, for example, we've historically required 900 hours for internship for clinical mental health students, we don't need to do that. And we could make a decision to modify that immediately without needing to involve other stakeholders. We also had some requirements about how hours were calculated and the degree to which hours could be cumulative or not across semesters. And we loosened that immediately. And I think 4 cases that pushed students across the line to having their direct hours finished without violating any state requirements or CACREP requirements. So we were still adherent. We were just able to be more flexible in that. I think the next kind of phase of our consideration was starting to try to tease apart the opportunities for direct service for school counselors who are out of their sites. I think our response has been a bit different in what my colleagues here have shared, because most of our students are placed in a very large district. I think we have 60-some schools that have been quite hesitant to offer anything to their stakeholders during this closure. So whereas we've heard of other districts doing things like Google Hangouts with students and check-ins, our district was not wanting to allow that. We also had been in communication about the possibility of school counseling interns who felt comfortable being at meal distribution. There were concerns about that. So as we started to look at our school counseling direct hours, we needed to do that into the context that most of our students were not going to be allowed to do that through their schools. In the last few days, we're starting to get other information that there might be some opportunity to open that up. For example, maybe some opportunity to do telephone needs assessments and check-ins with families. So while they're checking on technology for digital learning, might they also be able to have some standardized check-in in terms of well-being and coping, kind of a psychological first aid check-in with some of their stakeholders. We've also been exploring things like providing consultation to parents or school-age children who are tied to our university, but not specifically the school district. So could our university open up a consultation pool where people could call in and get support with their students or school-age children? Other opportunities for direct hours have included things like considering whether we might have some students buddy up in our clinics, which have moved to telehealth kind of services. So doing some pairing of services that are also ongoing to allow students to have direct engagement with clients, with real clients, not role play clients. And then also we have a partnership with our local National Suicide Prevention Lifeline affiliate, where we have been training some of our students and getting them on crisis lines, and we've been engaged in ongoing conversations with them about whether this might also be a direct hours pathway to be providing direct crisis response. The last consideration, and then I will bounce it to Sandy, I think, is how we support those clinical mental health counseling students who have moved to telehealth within their settings, realizing that we didn't have any students engaging in telehealth before this crisis. So that has included conversations about our student readiness to be in that service modality. It has raised conversations about the degree to which the site can provide immediate supervision and backup, the degree to which the student can still record their work, and then also what our responsibilities are in making sure our students have appropriate training in telehealth ethics and provision. So those have been some additional conversations that we're having. And with that, I will stop. I'm sure we'll come back to some of these things.
Thank you very much, Casey. We appreciate that. And it sounds like UT Knoxville is doing some pretty innovative things in terms of, I like the idea of pairing up students to have them help each other and also to be able to continue to get those direct hours. Also working on the crisis line, I think that's really great experience for your students to be getting. And, you know, I think we're going to be talking more about telehealth as we go through this, but there certainly are some concerns about students doing telehealth and how to best manage that. Especially in terms of supervision and support. So thank you very much for all of the information that you shared. I'd like to turn the time over now to Sandy Logan from Florida International University.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'm going to try not to repeat what others have shared, but I did want to start by just emphasizing something that Erin started our afternoon with, and the importance of consultation and collaboration. I think that these are important things, particularly in the times that we are facing and all the challenges and barriers that are presented in front of our students and our programs. And so really thinking about who can you consult with and who can you collaborate with. So I think even broadening your idea of who you're collaborating with is particularly important. And I feel very lucky at Florida International University that we started these conversations pretty early on. I want to say about 3 weeks ago, our administrative staff started with us. They brought together all faculty and programs that had any type of fieldwork experience, practicums, internships, and they started with us. So when we start talking about university or college level responses, we were the first group to get together. And so that was really helpful to really have the priority be focused on us. And so I think that that's helped us kind of have some of those conversations. I think the second part when we think about consultation and collaboration is also thinking about the resources and really the technology, the applications, the programs that we have available. And that's going to vary depending upon where we are. Being in South Florida, my school counseling students are at multiple large urban school districts. And so, you know, issues of equity and access are huge for us right now. And so those are really where some of our conversations are at right now with both my practicum and interns is what are the available resources and technology that exists. Because within each of the large urban school districts, there's quite a bit of variety and diversity among the students and the school's capabilities. And so that also does become a challenge for us. I thankfully have a good working relationship with both of the two larger school districts where I have people that are placed. But again, even with that, we still have to follow what are, you know, stay-at-home mandates or quarantined areas and the like. So a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Yes, we need to be focused on direct hours, but we also can't negate the importance of the indirect hours and what are we having our students do. My students have a nickname for me. They call me Mary Poppins because they usually come to me with something, and I've got either a person, a place, a website, a handout, a something to kind of respond to them with. And so the students have really tried to embrace that for themselves as well. How can they all be their own Mary Poppins, and giving those resources that are needed to their site supervisor even. So I think that one thing I've really empowered students to be thinking about is, what is the unique skill set and knowledge that they have that maybe their site supervisors don't, and how they can really be serving as the expert, perhaps in creating a Google site, or in understanding the ethical and legal implications or considerations with certain types of technologies. And so really kind of giving some power and expertise to our students, I think, is also helpful. In kind of that approach of being resourceful, I don't want my students to just be attending 17 different webinars. While they all have a particular focus and purpose and can be great, I do want them to be extending their learning activities beyond that. So my initial response to my school counseling students in particular, I created a document that outlined a list of activities that they could do in terms of accruing indirect hours beyond just webinar trainings that may come across their emails or across their desk. So some of those things, again, and thinking about this from a creative approach, is, could they create a brief video explaining what the school counselor's role is? Could they create an infographic that accompanies that video or replaces that video? Could they be creating a video about how administrators can best collaborate with school counselors, particularly in these challenging times? I also put together a list of videos that they might watch. Again, if we're all at home and do have the resource of having stable internet, there's a variety of shows on Netflix and Amazon Prime that provide great opportunities for reflection and connection to our field. So whether that's shows like Hentified or Unbelievable, Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, Broken, Wonder, Atypical, these are all things that have direct relationship to what our students are facing within their clinical practice. And so these can be great things for them to learn from. And then of course I have them write a summary and a reflection about how can they apply this to what they have learned in practice as well as within the program. One of the other things I wanted to mention too is, again, I tend to be kind of a tech-focused person. And so one of the things you might consider is, what are the resources that exist within your library? So I know that our library has an entire series of counseling videos. So if I wanted my students to focus on refining their skills and having a better understanding of reality theory, I know that there's some videos that I could direct them to practice those skills. Another technology tool that I've been able to utilize a little bit is called TheraView. Some of you may use this. And so one of the ways in which I use TheraView is for some of my practicum students to be practicing their skills. And so I can share my screen through Zoom and show a short video segment. Some of them are as short as 45 seconds. Some of them are as long as 6 minutes. And so I can share that on my screen, and the second that it's done, what would their response be? So that student then says, okay, I need to focus on empathy. What could be the best empathetic response that you could be giving in this moment? So there is still ways to be practicing some of those clinical skills, I think still utilizing technologies. So I think I will turn it back over at this point.
Thank you very much, Dr. Logan McKibben, and I really appreciate all those different innovative suggestions in creating both technology as well as pop culture, especially when we think about Netflixing and binging at this time. It provides some different ways for our students to think about continuing to consider their skills and refine those clinical skills with some of those available resources. I also just smiled thinking of you as Mary Poppins, so thank you very much for leaving that image as well. Before we move to some attendee questions, and we do have a few that have come in, I do just want to let people know some resources that are available. Following a successful webinar series from a couple weeks ago that Eric Perry and Marty Gencia ran, there was a group created that was also a resource sharing group. And so for those of you looking for some of these additional resources, some of which I've spoken about here today, some integrated by other colleagues, we'll send you that Slack information shortly so that you can also utilize some of those resources or perhaps add to those resources as well. Additionally, when we think about integrating any of these innovative strategies, each of these communicators talked about what they were able to implement in the university using the institutional resources that were available to them. Every different levels of support and resources. And so the reason why there's so many resources shared is because we know there's some differences across institutions and just want to make sure that you think thoughtfully about what is your institutions able for to move forward to meet some of those requirements direct hours. So after that, the Slack group was added by Dr. Berry in the chat function. There was a question from one of our panelists, and the attendee had asked, is there any concern of activities involving pairing school students, example, with mentoring of college students, crisis line, etc., not flying with KCREP since the work is not with youth? And so essentially asking, is there any concern about perhaps school council students or students from other specialties pairing across, we assume, is with another specialty to meet those direct service hours? Does anyone have any thoughts or suggestions related to that?
This is Casey. I am, of course, not representing KCREP, but this is certainly something that we talked about. In our case, we were looking at the proportion of experiences. So our school counselors are almost all within 20 direct hours of hitting their 240 direct hour requirement. They have been in the schools every day since August. So in looking at the proportion of experience that, yeah, maybe 20 direct hours comes with not a population right within a school, that seemed allowable to me. I also considered the degree to which school counselors regularly collaborate with other adults and caregivers and professionals within the school setting when looking about whether or not this might be allowable. So that has been a consideration. I really do think much of it comes down to the proportion of experience and the ability to make decisions about students' growth and progress in context of their own programs and the learning outcomes for those programs.
And I'll just follow up with, this is Natoya, with what Casey shared. We took a similar approach at William & Mary. Most of our students are, within 20 hours as well of having all of their hours met. And so, while ideally, they would have that K through 12 experience, but most of the topics that they are going to be providing support around are related also to K through 12 settings. So we felt like if that was the focus, then we were okay with that, especially for their last 20 hours.
This is Erin. I thought I would chime in with this possibility as an alternative, and not because it's something that we're doing, but it was something that was suggested by another colleague as a possible option. I don't know that I would, in our case, we're kind of similar to what Natoya and Casey have shared about our students being fairly close with direct hours. So I don't know that we would consider them working with college students as quite the kind of direct hours that we would want for them if they were really having difficulty finding things. But another colleague suggested an alternative, which I gave some thought to. Again, I don't think we're in the position where we have to think about this, but would be to potentially do some kind of lessons virtually of some kind, again, in collaboration with supervisor, with other school-age children, perhaps being like children of friends or something like that, where if they were still school-aged, and I think that's sort of where the emphasis is. Again, there's a lot of considerations I think you'd have to make with that about whether or not, if those children are not part of your caseload or part of your school, then there's sort of a relationship issue there. You would want to have the supervisor involved. You'd want to think about what topics and draw some boundaries around that. So I'm just putting that out there as another alternative to kind of what this particular individual was asking about related to college students, that maybe other school-age children might be another option.
And I do think, this is Natoya again, you know, one of the things that we've tried to do is have as many options as we possibly can, because we know that things are changing just every day. You wake up and there's some new, you know, limitation in place that you didn't count on before. And so, you know, if we can give our students 3 or 4 different ways that they can get those hours, we're hopeful that at least 2 or 3 of them are going to work out. You know, so that's something too to keep in mind. Like, you know, with our students, while you know, gave them that option, we also gave them 3 other options that they could also utilize to get those direct hours.
Thank you all very much for sharing those additional insights and clarifications. We did have another participant send a message to Eric. It appears that now this, of course, is a group of counselor educators coming together. We obviously cannot speak for CACREP. You know, we want to make sure we, in good faith, provide direct service hours to our students. I apologize, multiple things are popping up here. But we did notice that there is actually a representative from CACREP on the call. I'm not sure if he would like to share any information from what he's heard or share any points of clarification if he would be so willing.
If anybody else does want to join, ask questions of the presenters, I can unmute your mic. Just send me a message through the chat feature and I'll get you on.
Okay. Well, we do have a question from another counselor educator, also looking for on a situation that they had. Let's see, some of my students have had the capability to do webinars and virtual lessons as a mean of direct service to students. Others, however, don't have this capability. There's no infrastructure for video services. To get creative, some students have used weekly newsletters to stay in touch with students. How would these hours be logged, direct or indirect? Usually I would see where it would be indirect, but given the current situation, how else, other than using what's available, i.e. newsletters, would this in turn serve students directly?
I do think that's a difficult one. This is Natoya. So this is one of the reasons why we kind of came up with a list of opportunities for direct service, because you always have that 1 or 2 people where it seems like nothing's going to work. One of the things, and I can't remember who on the panel said this, but you know, giving students also the option of working with someone in clinical mental health, providing some type of support or doing some type of providing some type of support for those students in more of a kind of support group type format. That's something we've kind of talked about. You know, we have not moved in that direction as of yet, but I would imagine if we had a student where none of the opportunities that we provided worked out, then that would be a direction we would go. One of the things I said earlier was one of our faculty members directs a mentoring program that is housed within the K through 12 setting. And what he has done is actually provided some support services that, you know, where we are sending information directly through our listservs and other kind of avenues that that we have to reach parents. We're sending information also to the directors for students and parents to actually receive support services. We're not calling them counseling, but really just facilitative type services. So that would be something that, I would potentially consider. I don't know what the infrastructure of your program is, but just a couple of ideas that we would have.
This is Erin. Along those same lines, and I just want to reiterate what Natoya is saying about options. And I think that those options for students in accumulating these hours, particularly the direct hours, just really look so different because of how the schools are operating and what they're choosing to allow or not allow. One idea that came out of I think the list that I shared in the chat that I thought was really creative in terms of direct hours that I think you could count as direct hours. So I'm thinking about the question that was asked about sort of newsletters, was the idea of handwriting cards to students. And I thought, it's not direct in the sense that it is two-way per se. And I don't think you would want to necessarily invite an ongoing handwriting kind of relationship back and forth with cards or whatever. But I thought, if I were to write out cards for, say, all of the students that, I had in a small group or something like that, that I think under certain circumstances where there are a lot of limitations, that could be considered a direct contact. And I know I kind of laughed, to myself because I thought if I handwrite cards, it's going to take me a half an hour per student because I don't use handwriting very much anymore. And it's definitely a more slow and painful process than just typing. So, I think, again, just going back to the idea of options for some of places where there are a lot of limitations in terms of what our students and interns can do, that kind of creative thinking, I think, has to come into play. And obviously, you would want to coordinate with the supervisor in doing that, make sure that they're, seeing all those cards and they're clearing that communication. But it was something that that I thought it came up that was pretty creative.
Thank you both. And it appears we have many more questions in our chat function now. One asks, I'm curious what telecounseling platforms others are using and how they are supervising telecounseling sessions.
So this is Casey, I can share. Some of our students are at sites where they were very quickly able to get onto various telehealth platforms. Our students who are at sites where they're just now navigating or as we are navigating within our program-based clinic, we are using Zoom Pro with a BAA, some kind of fancy agreement that makes it HIPAA compliant. So even though we got notice last week that the feds were loosening up on reinforcing some of the platforms that were used, we wanted to make sure that we were using an account that was appropriate. In terms of the supervision options, Zoom allows recording and many others also allow recording. One of the things we've been looking at is security of those recordings. We don't want to use the cloud-based storage necessarily, but we are also concerned about each recording being about 0.5 GB stored on a student's computer, and then how does that get transferred for supervision? So we've also talked about workarounds such as having the typical recording device that was already in use simply on the table next to the computer in a way that can still capture audio but not video. We are also, and then being able to secure that, transmit that through Secure Portal. We've also been looking at the possibility of supervisors literally dropping in on sessions. So some of our sites have developed a safeguard for their students that the supervisor has the link to the session in advance, and that if the student requests help, that the supervisor is able to directly enter that session in real time. So those are just a couple of the conversations that we've been having.
Thank you, Casey. I can also share from a UNM perspective, we've used VC for telecounseling services, which is also HIPAA compliant if Zoom's not an option. There is quite a number of other questions. I'm just scrolling up as they continue to come in. One person asked, in regards to all these different options, are you limiting the maximum number of hours students can earn in this way? We require 600 hours for our PPS students, 200 per semester by 3 semesters. So should we only allow a certain number of hours in these types of activities, or are you allowing whatever they want to do?
This is Sandy. I'll jump in and say, prior to COVID-19, I had in my courses that no more than 10 hours of professional development could be accrued without prior approval. And now I've taken away that that requirement and said, they are eligible to earn, hours through a variety of means. And that is really to tend to the issues of equity and access and the disparities amongst each of our students and what their current circumstances are. So I would not be dictating the hours. I would also say, in the matter of getting creative, is that if you do have the opportunity of having things split amongst 2 semesters, is there flexibility around the number of hours? Does it have to be 300 each semester, or could it be 200 this semester and 400 next semester? So I would encourage you to think creatively about that.
This is Erin. I would just add to that and say what we have expressed to our students as well as our supervisors is that what the site needs takes priority. So that may vary. I think the answer to that question about, how many of something you allow for really depends specifically on the site. So again, I think, what we don't want is we don't want students to spend all of their remaining indirect hours only in professional development, like Sandy said, or things that maybe benefit their learning but don't necessarily benefit the site. So we've really encouraged that, again, all those indirect hours and direct hours, that the site needs to take the priority in how they determine what gets done. And then, again, I think just in response to the actual question, that's probably going to vary from site to site.
And since we're speaking, oh, sorry.
This is Casey, and I just wanted to add one additional piece. I completely agree with what others have contributed. At the core of that question, I asked myself whether I am able to know whether the student can perform the work tasks that they need to be able to perform in their setting. So I'm much less concerned about hours limits and caps, and much more concerned about whether the student has the skills they need to be a functioning professional after graduation. So I think for me, when I kind of turn the question on the side a little bit, whether I would put hours caps or limits on a particular student would depend on what I know of their progress to date and any remediation or gatekeeping concern that I might have for that specific student. But I would not be in favor of overall limits or caps at this point.
Thank you very much for that, Casey. I think that's a great thought to also have. Similar to the question related to sites, an attendee asks, they're new to the role of a practicum or intern coordinator, and assuming that most alternatives for direct hours would need to be accompanied by new MOUs, especially if working with new populations or sites. They are wondering if others have found this to be a barrier, especially with the current load placed on institutional lawyers at the moment, and how people have found manageable ways to navigate that if they've had to navigate that.
This is Natoya. I mean, we have not specifically had that issue, just because we really have tried to work within the partners that we've worked with in the past, to try to provide opportunities through those mechanisms. I think it would be challenging for us right now to venture beyond kind of what we've had our hands kind of in, for lack of a better way of explaining that, at this point, just because people I feel like are very insular right now. And so I know that's not answering the question, but that's just kind of how we're dealing with that right now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hoskins. Another attendee has asked, for those of you who've had state licensure boards had not clarified whether telehealth is ethical or legal for LPCs, how are you legally navigating this gray area of ambiguity? Are you waiting and shutting down operations? Are you implementing a HIPAA compliant platform for temporary purposes? Or are you providing telehealth under the guise of consultation and psychoeducation?
This is Casey. That's a great question. I think there are a couple layers to it. We've been reading our laws and participating in discussion groups and seeking out consultation on this issue as well. In terms of our students' engagement at the site, we are leaving it up to the site to determine which practices are appropriate for the nature of their work and for the nature of the licensed professionals in their work. I do know that there is an issue in the state of Tennessee with the degree to which telehealth can be used for postgraduate hours that go toward licensure. So after a student has graduated from their program, Tennessee currently has some limitations on the degree to which direct hours can be counted through telehealth settings. The board's actually been looking at loosening that up. And so I know that that is becoming an advocacy need in the state. Right now, I don't see a direct connection to it, to our students' ability to provide services under a licensed mental health professional. But it's a good question, and I think it's one that we'll be continuing to seek clarity on in the time to come.
Thank you. If we have any other questions for our panelists, please feel free to type in the chat function or to send to either of us. There is, I think, a good reminder that, again, we are all just counselor educators on this call and cannot speak for CACREP. CACREP does have several FAQ pages on their website, and so it'd be important to look at those whenever implementing any new procedures. Those sites are updated routinely, and so it's always just important to check in to make sure we have the most current rulings as well as information coming from our accreditor.
Yeah, and I think Casey raised a good point too in terms of checking with state licensing boards to see what their position is. And I know that in Utah, they have loosened up what they have said about telehealth practice for the time being, because they recognize that people still have mental health issues, even when they're told that they can't go anywhere, that they need to stay home. So it is important to be looking at what your state licensure boards have to say about what they will allow and what they won't allow in terms of telehealth.
I did notice in the chat function, Dr. Trolley did start a post to provide some resources that they're using at Canisius, but it does not appear as if those resources came through in the chat function, and so just wanted to let her know she did want to share some additional ideas on Canisius College. Oh, and it looks like she just posted right there. So thank you very much for that. So we are scheduled for 20 minutes of a conference call. We don't need to take the full minutes if people feel satisfied with the current discussion. Can stay in line, most of our panelists, for a bit longer. If there are other questions or comments that you'd like to make, we'll give it a few more minutes, and then if not, we could potentially end a little bit early. In hearing any of the questions from attendees, though, I wonder if panelists have any reactions or thoughts in regards to what they've heard, or even some final thoughts as they've moved through this discussion.
I guess a final thought for me, and I guess something that I've gleaned just from hearing the other panelists share, is the communication piece. I feel like is huge. Communication and collaboration. What I've found to be true for me in this situation, and for a lot of our students, is a lot of times when we ask, we've been surprised with the response from some of our stakeholders related to opportunities for them to engage. Or what I've another piece of that is, initially they'll say, I'm not sure we can do that, and then I will get a call back or an email back saying, let's talk about it more, let's see how we can make it work. And so I would be open, ask, and see if there is an opportunity to make it work in a way that maybe you didn't think, or they didn't even consider it before. So.
This is Sandy. One thing that I will share as kind of an observation over the last couple of weeks is that this is kind of uncharted territory for many individuals, including ourselves. If you think about when someone decides to purchase a car, there are some people who are those early adopters that will buy a car at the the first month it comes out, and there's others that are going to take some time for kinks to get worked out, for upgrades to be made. And that same kind of approach is going for much of this surrounding telehealth and beyond. So there are going to be individuals who are more of those early adopters, and then there's also going to be individuals that may be on the other end of the spectrum of those late adopters. And so really trying to just support where each person is at. With all of the resources that are out there, learning the technologies, and then just what are even realistic or feasible capabilities for everyone.
Thank you very much for that, Sandy and Natoya.
This is Casey. I think one of the things I keep going back to is how we can keep integrity of our programs in such a way that we honor the commitments we've made related to accreditation, and ultimately the commitments we've made related to client care and to only graduating professionals who are able and willing to do the work they need to do. I think when I center on that, I then start to think about the additional choices and decisions we might make along the way. So one of the things that I want to do, provided that we've honored our baseline requirements of protecting clients and honoring commitments we've made, I mentioned accreditation, but also related to licensure preparation, is that whatever action we take from here, I hope we can do so in a way that minimizes the additional cost to students. That when, as programs, if we just shut down and pull everybody out of sites and we say, you can stay with us an extra semester or two, there are very real costs in terms of enrollment, and there are very real costs in terms of time out of the workforce. And so I do not want to be making those decisions for students unless I believe that that is absolutely necessary for client well-being. And that's more of a case by case than a program level decision. So that's another piece I think that has come out for me kind of continually. How do we keep integrity and also not cause harm to our students who in many cases have been deeply impacted economically by changes in the last week? So when half of my students say that they are out of work now because they worked in service industry and they can't work, they're worried about where they're getting their next meal, and I don't want to extend that any more than we absolutely need to. So that's just another consideration to add in there.
Thank you very much for that, Casey. I appreciate the focus on our students and our students' needs. There were a couple questions that did come in. One is, attendee asked, our program started practicum this summer. It is challenging trying to help others finish internship while others starting practicum. Can anyone speak to the starting practicum piece of this? So it sounds like finalizing internship students while beginning the practicum students.
This is Casey, and I have thoughts, but I feel like I'm talking a lot, and I can't see my panel, the co-presenters' faces to know. Yeah, I think, so the question is around starting practicum students in the summer. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, also finalizing internship students, I guess, also within the summer period.
Yeah. It's so hard to predict where we'll be 2 months from now and the degree to which our sites will be back to normal operations or not. I think for students who are starting a practicum this summer, I think there's a potential that they may be disrupted from that a site may not be able and willing to take them on in the way that they may have been able to take them on in the past. I also have some degree of concern regarding the degree to which sites are going to be able to take on interns to start in the fall. Absolutely in the summer, but even into the fall, whether our typical interviewing and site securing processes will be disrupted and how flexible we'll need to be next year. So that's something that I kind of see coming, but I don't know what action we can take on it in this moment because so many sites are just trying to transition day to day. I have heard CACREP's guidance around allowing some flexibility in the length of terms for practicum and allowing some flow over of hours as long as one experience is completed prior to the other. And so I think programs are probably going to need to get creative with some of that, including the possibility of using mini terms or partial terms when perhaps they had used longer, more traditional semester delivery. But I think that question is a good one, but one that I just don't know right now. And I imagine that's what some of the silence may have been about.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking that question, Casey. I was thinking about myself about supervision requirements and not going over too many supervisees in some agencies, some sites, as well as thinking about our standards. And so that's perhaps a question to ask CACREP for the future. There was another comment from Andy, just reflection that CACREP is allowing programs to look at recruiters to come and for that to count, if wanted, in excess to direct and indirect hours for internship. And so making sure to look at that most recent CACREP FAQ, knowing that if students did go above 40 hours direct, 100 hours indirect or total, that those hours could be counted towards internship at this time period. Well, at this point, I'd like to thank all our panelists as well as all of our attendees. We are in a very crazy time. I do appreciate all of our panelists taking times out of their very busy schedule, their expertise, and some of their thoughts with us. Additionally, I just would like to all for also taking this time to come together as well as engage in this discussion so we could serve our program, serve our field in the best that we're able to in this odd new normal. So thank you all for your very hard work and your heavy lifts as we've transitioned this time. And I hope you and all your loved ones stay well as we continue to move through this time period. So thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Barrio-Minton, Dr. Hoskins, Dr. Mason, Dr. Logan McKibben, as well as facilitator Dr. Ambrose.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for coming. Again, the recording will be available to you within a day or two. If you have any questions about this, where to find it, other resources, feel free to reach out at social media. at acesonline.net. Thank you again to all of our presenters, and everyone take care, stay safe, and be well.